Chapter 3. The Second Interview with the Mysterious Visitor. It is not pleasant to have one's mental responsibility brought in question, and the result of my interview with Professor Chickering was, to put it mildly, unsatisfactory. Not that he had exactly questioned my sanity, but it was all too evident that he was disposed to accept my statement of a plain matter-of-fact occurrence with a too liberal modicum of salt. I say matter-of-fact occurrence in full knowledge of the truth that I myself had at first regarded the whole transaction as a fantasia or flight of mind, the result of extreme nervous tension, but in the interval succeeding I had abundant opportunity to correlate my thoughts and to bring some sort of order out of the mental and physical chaos of that strange, eventful night. True, the preliminary events leading up to it were extraordinary. The dismal weather, the depression of body and spirit under which I labored, the wild whirl of thought keeping pace with the elements, in short, a general concatenation of events that seemed to be orderly, especially for the introduction of some abnormal visitor. The night would indeed have been incomplete without a ghost. But was it a ghost? There was nothing ghostly about my visitor except the manner of his entrance and exit. In other respects he seemed substantial enough. He was, in his manners, courteous and polished as a Chesterfield, learned as a savant in his conversation, human in his thoughtful regard of my fears and misgivings. But that tremendous forehead, with its crown of silver hair, the long translucent beard of pearly whiteness, and above all, the astounding faculty with which he read my hidden thoughts, these were not natural. The professor had been patient with me. I had a right to expect that. He was entertaining to the extent of reading such excerpts as he had with him on the subject of hallucinations and their supposed causes. But had he not spoiled by assigning me at last to a place with the questionable, unbalanced characters he had cited? I thought so, and the reflection provoked me, and this thought grew upon me until I came to regard his stories and attendant theories as so much literary trash. My own reflections had been sober and deliberate, and had led me to seek a rational explanation of the unusual phenomena. I had gone to Professor Chickering for a certain measure of sympathy, and what was more to the point, to secure his suggestions and assistance in the further unraveling of a profound mystery that might contain a secret of untold use to humanity. Repulsed by the mode in which my confidence had been received, I decided to do what I should have done from the outset, to keep my own counsel, and to follow alone the investigation to the end, no matter what the result might be. I could not forget or ignore the silver hair I had so religiously preserved. That was genuine. It was as tangible, as real, as convincing a witness as would have been the entire head of my singular visitant, whatever might be his nature. I began to feel at ease the moment my course was decided, and the feeling was at once renewed within me that the gray head would come again, and by degrees that expectation ripened into a desire, only intensified as the days sped by. The weeks passed into months, summer came and went, autumn was fast fading, but the mysterious unknown did not appear. A curious fancy led me now to regard him as my friend, for the mixed and indefinite feelings I had at first towards him had almost unaccountably been changed to those of sincere regard. He was not always in my thoughts, for I had abundant occupation at all times to keep both brain and hands busy, but there were few evenings in which I did not, just before retiring, giving myself up for a brief period to quiet communion with my own thoughts, and I must confess, at such times the unknown occupied the larger share of attention. The constant contemplation of any theme begets a feeling of familiarity or acquaintance with the same, and if that subject be an individual, as in the present instance, such contemplation lessens the liability to surprise from an unexpected development. In fact, I had not only anticipated a visit, but courted it. The old Latin maxim that I had played with, never less alone than when alone, had domiciled itself within my brain as a permanent lodger, a conviction, a feeling, rather than a thought defined, and I had but little difficulty in associating an easy chair, which I had come to a place in a certain position, for my expected visitor, with his presence. Indian summer had passed, and the fall was nearly gone, when for some inexplicable reason the number 7 began to haunt me. But what had I to do with 7, or 7 with me? I found myself asking this question audibly one evening, when it suddenly occurred to me that I would refer to the date of my friend's visit. I kept no journal, but reference to a record of some business transactions that I had associated with that event showed that it took place on November 7th. That settled the important 7. I should look from whoever was on the first anniversary of this visit, which was the 7th, now close at hand. The instant I had reached this conclusion, the number left me and troubled me no more. November 3rd had passed, the 4th and the 5th had come, when a stubborn, protesting notion entered my mind that I was yielding to a superstitious idea and that it was time to control my vacillating will. Accordingly, on this day I sent word to a friend that, if agreeable to him, I would call him on the evening of the 7th for a short social chat, but as I expected to be engaged until later than usual, would be excused if I could not reach his apartment until 10. The request was singular, but as I now accounted somewhat odd, it excited no comment, and the answer was returned requesting me to come. The 7th of November came at last. I was nervous during the day, which seemed to drag tediously, and several times it was remarked of me that I seemed abstracted and ill at ease, but I held my peace. Night came cold and clear, and the stars shone brighter than usual, I thought. It was a sharp contrast to the night of a year ago. I took an early supper, for which I had no appetite, after which I strolled aimlessly about the streets, revolving how I should put in the time till 10 o'clock, when I was to call upon my friend. I decided to go to the theater, and to the theater I went. The play was spectacular, Aladdin, or The Wonderful Lamp. The entertainment, to me, was a flat failure, for I was busy with my thoughts, and it was not long until my thoughts were busy with me, and I found myself attempting to answer a series of questions that finally became embarrassing. Why did you make an appointment for 10 o'clock instead of 8 if you wished to keep away from your apartments? I hadn't thought of that before. It was stupid to a degree, if not ill-mannered, and I frankly admitted as much. Why did you make an appointment at all in the face of the fact that you not only expected a visitor, but were anxious to meet him? This was easily answered, because I did not wish to yield to what struck me as superstition. But do you expect to extend your call until morning? Well, no, I hadn't thought or arranged to do so. Well then, what is to prevent your expected guest from awaiting your return? Or what assurance have you that he will not encounter you in the street under circumstances that will provoke or, at the least, embarrass you? None whatever. Then what have you gained by your stupid perversity? Nothing beyond the assertion of my own individuality. Why not go home and receive your guest in becoming style? No, I would not do that. I had started on this course, and I would persevere in it. I would be consistent, and so I persisted, at least until 9 o'clock, when I quit the theater in sullen dejection and went home to make some slight preparation for my evening call. With my latchkey, I let myself into the front door of the apartment house wherein I lodged, walked through the hall, up the staircase, and paused on the threshold of my room, wondering what I would find inside. Opening the door, I entered, leaving it open behind me so that the light from the hallway would shine into the room, which was dark, and there was no transom above the door. The grate fire had caked into a solid mass of charred bituminous coal, which shed no illumination beyond the faint red glow at the bottom, showing that it was barely alive, and no more. I struck a match on the underside of the mantel shelf, and as I lit the glass I heard the click of the door latch. I turned instantly. The door had been gently closed by some unknown force, if not by unseen hands, for there was no breath of air stirring. This preternatural interference was not pleasant, for I had hoped in the event of another visit from my friend, if friend he was, that he would bring no uncanny or ghostly manifestation to disturb me. I looked at the clock. The index pointed to 9:30. I glanced about the room. It was orderly, everything in proper position, even to the armchair that I had been wont to place for my nondescript visitor. It was time to be going, so I turned to the dressing case, brushed my hair, put on a clean scarf, and moved towards the washstand, which stood in a little alcove on the opposite side of the room. My self-command well nigh deserted me as I did so, for there, in the armchair that a moment before was empty, sat my guest of a year ago, facing me with placid features. The room began to revolve. A faint, sick feeling came over me, and I reeled into the first convenient chair and covered my face with my hands. This depression lasted but an instant, however, and as I recovered my self-possession, I felt or fancied I felt a pair of penetrating eyes fixed upon me with the same mild, searching gaze I remembered so well. I ventured to look up. Sure enough, there they were, the beaming eyes, and there was he. Rising from his chair, he towered up to his full height, smiled pleasantly, and with a slight inclination of the head murmured, "Permit me to wish you good evening. I am profoundly glad to meet you again." It was full a minute before I could muster courage to answer. I wish I could say as much for myself. "And why shouldn't you?" he said, gently and courteously. "You have realized for the past 6 months that I would return. More than that, you have known for some time the very day and almost the exact hour of my coming. Even have you wished for it, and in the face of all this, I find you preparing to evade the requirements of common hospitality. Are you doing either me justice or yourself?" I was nettled at the knowledge he displayed of my movements and of my very thoughts. My old stubbornness asserted itself, and I was rude enough to say, "Perhaps it is as you say. At all events, I am obligated to keep an engagement, and with your permission will now retire." It was curious to mark the effect of his speech upon the intruder. He immediately became grave, reached quietly into an inner pocket of his coat, drew thence the same glittering, horrible, mysterious knife that he had so terrified and bewildered me a year before, and looked me steadily in the eye, said coldly, yet with a certain tone of sadness, "Well, I will not grant permission. It is unpleasant to resort to this style of argument, but I do it to save time and controversy." I stepped back in terror and reached for the old-fashioned bell cord with the heavy tassel at the end that depended from the ceiling, and was on the point of grasping and giving it a vigorous pull. "Not so fast, if you please," he said sternly, as he stepped forward and gave his knife a rapid swish through the air above my head, causing the cord to fall in a tangle about my hand, cut cleanly, high above my reach. I gazed in dumb stupor at the rope about my hand and raised my eyes to the remnant above. That was motionless. There was not the slightest perceptible vibration, such as would naturally be expected. I turned to look at my guest. He had resumed his seat, and had also regained his pleasant expression, but he still held the knife in his hand, with his arm extended at rest upon the table which stood upon his right. "Let us have an end to this folly," he said. "Think a moment, and you will see that you are in fault. Your error will rectify easily, and then to business. I will first show you the futility of trying to escape this interview, and then we will proceed to work, for time presses, and there is much to do." Having delivered this remark, he detached a single silvery hair from his head, blew it from his fingers, and let it float gently upon the upturned edge of the knife, which was still resting on the table. Having delivered this remark, he detached a single silvery hair from his head, blew it from his fingers, and let it float gently upon the upturned edge of the knife, which was still resting on the table. The hair was divided as readily as had been the bell cord. I was transfixed with astonishment, for he had evidently aimed to exhibit the quality of the blade, though he made no allusion to the feat, but smilingly went on with his discourse. "It is just a year ago tonight since we first met. Upon that occasion you made an agreement with me, which you are in honor bound to keep." And here he paused. Chapter 3. A second interview with a mysterious visitor. It is not pleasant to have one's mental responsibility brought in question, and the result of my interview with Professor Chickering was, to put it mildly, unsatisfactory. Not that he had exactly questioned my sanity, but it was all too evident that he was disposed to accept my statement of a plain matter-of-fact occurrence with a too liberal modicum of salt. I say matter-of-fact occurrence in full knowledge of the truth that I myself had at first regarded the whole transaction as a fantasia or flight of mind, the result of extreme nervous tension, but in the interval succeeding I had abundant opportunity to correlate my thoughts and to bring some sort of order out of the mental and physical chaos of that strange, eventful night. True, the preliminary events leading up to it were extraordinary. The professor had been patient with me. I had a right to expect that. He was entertaining to the extent of reading such excerpts as he had with him on the subject of hallucinations and their supposed causes. But had he not spoiled by assigning me at last to a place with the questionable, unbalanced characters he had cited? I thought so, and the reflection provoked me, and this thought grew upon me until I came to regard his. In other respects he seemed substantial enough. He was, in his manners, courteous and polished as a Chesterfield, learned as a savant in his conversation, human in his thoughtful regard of my fears and misgivings. But that tremendous forehead, with its crown of silver hair, the long translucent beard of pearly whiteness, and above all, the astounding faculty with which he read my hidden thoughts, these were not natural. The dismal weather, the depression of body and spirit under which I labored, the wild whirl of thought keeping pace with the elements, in short, a general concatenation of events that seemed to be orderly, especially for the introduction of some abnormal visitor. The night would indeed have been incomplete without a ghost. But was it a ghost? There was nothing ghostly about my visitor except the manner of his entrance and exit.